Tessa Novak had worn her good Spanx for this. Not the everyday ones she kept in the back of her drawer, stretched and greyed from too many washes. The good ones. The ones still in the original packaging that she'd bought 8 months ago for a company holiday party she'd ultimately talked herself out of attending. She'd put them on that evening with the kind of deliberate optimism that takes real effort, smoothing the nude compression fabric up over her hips, adjusting, breathing in, telling herself this was fine. This was good. She deserved a nice evening out. She'd also skipped lunch, not because she was dieting. She wasn't doing that anymore. She'd made herself that promise 2 years ago, and she'd mostly kept it. She'd skipped lunch because she'd been nervous, and when Tessa got nervous, her stomach turned into a fist, and eating into a clenched fist never ended well. So she'd had black coffee at her desk, answered 17 emails about payroll discrepancies, and watched the clock until 5:30, when she finally allowed herself to go home and get ready. The restaurant was called Marchetti's. It was the kind of place where the menus didn't have prices, where the lighting was amber and warm and strategically flattering, where the host said, of course, "Right this way," like he'd been expecting you specifically. Tessa had looked it up 3 times on her phone before arriving, reading the reviews with the focused anxiety of someone preparing for an exam. 4 stars. Elegant atmosphere. The duck confit is extraordinary. Make a reservation in advance. She had a reservation. She'd made it herself, actually, when Kyle Dean had texted her and said, "You pick somewhere nice, I trust you," which she had thought at the time was charming. That had been 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks of texts of 2 after-work drinks at a bar in River North, of the slow accumulation of small shared jokes and what she had allowed herself to call cautiously possibility. Kyle was a financial advisor at the firm across the street from her accounting office. They'd met in the elevator of the building they both used for parking. He'd noticed her tote bag, the one with the Chicago skyline print, and said, "That's a great bag." And she'd said, "Thanks. I got it at a street fair," and somehow they'd ended up exchanging numbers on the sidewalk in the October cold. She arrived at Marchetti's at 7:02, 2 minutes late, which she'd calculated on purpose. Not so late as to be rude, not so early as to seem desperate. The host seated her at a table near the window. She ordered sparkling water and tried to look like a woman who ate at places like this all the time. By 7:30, she'd checked her phone 4 times. By 8, she checked it 11. She had 1 text from Kyle. Sent at 6:58, 12 minutes before she'd arrived. "Running a little behind, traffic's awful. Don't worry," she had replied. "No worries, take your time," with the exclamation point she already regretted. He had not replied to that. The waiter, a young man with careful posture and the patient eyes of someone trained to witness human discomfort without acknowledging it, came by at 8:15 and asked if she was ready to order. She said she'd wait a little longer. He nodded with practiced neutrality and refilled her water. At 8:40, she stopped refreshing her texts. At 9:03, the waiter set a small bread basket on her table without being asked, and she understood that this was an act of mercy. She ate 2 pieces of bread with butter because she was genuinely hungry, and also because what else was she going to do? And while she chewed, she looked out the window at the street below, at people in coats moving with purpose, and she felt something she recognized as the particular humiliation of being very visibly stood up in a nice restaurant on a Friday night while wearing good Spanx. Her phone buzzed. She grabbed it faster than she meant to. It wasn't Kyle. It was a text from her friend Danny. "How's the date going?" Followed by 3 champagne glass emojis. Tessa stared at it for a moment, then put the phone face down on the table. She would not cry. She wasn't going to cry in Marchetti's. She was a 31-year-old licensed CPA who had her own apartment and a Roth IRA, and she had been stood up before, and she had survived it before. And she was going to pick up her coat, say thank you to the patient waiter, and go home and eat the leftover pad thai in her refrigerator. with the dignity of a woman who had better things to do on a Friday night anyway. She was reaching for her coat when she heard the sound, not the ambient sound of the restaurant. The low murmur of conversation, the faint clink of glasses, the distant elegance of someone playing a piano she hadn't even noticed. This was different. A change in the room's temperature, almost. The particular silence that falls when a place collectively registers something it wasn't expecting. The front door opened. She didn't look up immediately. She was focused on working her coat off the back of her chair without making a production of it. But then the murmur of the room shifted again, lower, more concentrated. And something in the quality of the stillness made her glance toward the entrance. The man standing in the doorway of Marchetti's was not Kyle Dean. He was, and Tessa registered this in the detached, clinical way she registered financial anomalies. Things that didn't add up and demanded a second look. Enormous, not in a soft way. In the way of someone who had been built for a specific and demanding purpose. He stood well over 6 feet, broad through the shoulders, wearing a dark suit that had clearly been cut to measure, because nothing off a rack would have accommodated the geometry of him. His hair was dark, swept back. His jaw looked like it had been drawn by someone who was trying to make a point. He was flanked by 2 men in similar suits who positioned themselves just behind and to either side of him with the practiced quiet of people who did this constantly. The host, the same host who had greeted Tessa with warm professionalism, approached this man and said something Tessa couldn't hear. The man in the doorway looked at him, just looked, and the host took a very small step back. Then the man's gaze moved through the room. Not scanning exactly, more like cataloguing. His eyes moved from table to table with the measured efficiency of someone assessing a room for threats or exits or both. When his gaze reached her table, it stopped. Tessa looked back at her water glass. She heard footsteps approaching. She told herself they weren't coming toward her. There was no reason for them to be coming toward her. She was nobody. She was a CPA from Wicker Park who had skipped lunch and was now leaving a restaurant alone on a Friday night, and the very last thing she needed on top of all of that was, "You've been here since 7. She looked up. The man from the doorway was standing at her table. This close. The scale of him was somehow worse, or better, some rogue part of her brain suggested, which she immediately overruled. His eyes were dark grey, the color of lake water in November. He wasn't smiling. "Excuse me," she said. "I arrived 40 minutes ago." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, unhurried, as if she had invited him. "You were here when I came in. You're still here. Whoever you're waiting for isn't coming." The bluntness of it landed somewhere between insulting and, she had to admit, accurate. "That," she said with what she felt was admirable composure, "is none of your business." "No," he agreed. He picked up the menu that the waiter had left on Kyle's side of the table and looked at it. "It isn't. Then why are you sitting at my table?" He looked at her over the top of the menu. Something moved behind his eyes. Not quite amusement, not quite respect, something in between. "Because every other table in this restaurant belongs to me tonight, and this one appeared to be available." Tessa looked around. The restaurant, she realized, had undergone a subtle transformation in the last few minutes. Several tables near the back had been cleared. 2 of the men in dark suits were positioned near the entrance. The piano had stopped. "This is a private event," she said slowly. "In 40 minutes, yes, then I should go." She reached again for her coat. "Stay." It wasn't a request. It wasn't quite a command either. It was something in between. A word spoken with the absolute certainty of a man who had not been told no in a very long time, and was not necessarily prepared for it now, but was, perhaps, curious. She stopped reaching for her coat. "I don't know you," she said. "Raphael Caruso." He set the menu down and extended his hand across the table with the formal precision of someone who had been taught exactly one correct way to introduce himself. And you're going to tell me who kept you waiting 3 hours in a dress that clearly deserved better company. Tessa looked at his hand, then she shook it, because refusing felt disproportionate. His grip was firm and brief, and he released her hand exactly when he should have. Tessa Novak, she said, and it was 2 hours, approximately. 2 hours and 6 minutes, he said. I noticed when I came in. Something about the precision of that. 2 hours and 6 minutes made her feel unexpectedly seen in a way that was uncomfortable. And also, she was slightly ashamed to admit, not entirely unpleasant. The waiter appeared at the table. He looked between Tessa and Raphael Caruso with the very careful neutrality of someone who was paid to have no opinions. The lady, Raphael said, without looking at the waiter, hasn't eaten. I had bread, Tessa said. Bring the tasting menu, both of us. He paused. And whatever she wants to drink. I didn't agree to dinner, Tessa said. He looked at her directly. You haven't disagreed. Which was infuriatingly true. She ordered a glass of the Barolo, because if a mysterious man in an expensive suit was going to commandeer her table on the worst evening she'd had in recent memory, she was at minimum going to drink something worth remembering. What do you do? Raphael asked. Accounting, she said. Corporate forensic accounting. Specifically, I find where money has gone when it shouldn't have gone there. Something shifted in his expression. Coincidental. She'd been watching for it. She watched for shifts in expression the way she watched for discrepancies in balance sheets, out of professional habit. And what she saw wasn't the polite disinterest she usually got when she told people what she did at dinner parties. And you do this for who? He said. Mostly private firms. Some referrals through the DA's office. She what? She watched him. Watch her. Why do you ask like that? Like what? Like the answer matters. He was quiet for a moment. The first course arrived, something with scallops and a foam she didn't have a name for, and she ate it because she was genuinely hungry, and also because she had decided that whatever this evening had become, she wasn't going to spend it performing a version of herself she wasn't. Tell me about the man who didn't come, Raphael said. I'd rather not. Why? Because he doesn't deserve the conversation. She set down her fork. He texted at 7 that he was running late. He never arrived. He hasn't replied to my follow-up. I've now been promoted to assuming it was intentional. She looked out the window at the street. Which is fine. I'm fine. I just would have preferred to be stood up somewhere I could order takeout. He's a fool, Raphael said. It wasn't said with the theatrical gallantry of someone trying to make her feel better. It was said the way he might observe that a column of numbers didn't add up. Flatly. As a fact. She looked at him. You don't know anything about me, she said. I know you've been sitting alone in a restaurant for over 2 hours, and you haven't cried or made a scene or done anything, except eat bread with a dignity most people couldn't manage in significantly less trying circumstances. He picked up his wine. I know you do financial forensics and you work with the DA's office, which means you're either exceptionally intelligent or exceptionally brave, and given what I've observed tonight, probably both. He paused. I know you're wearing a dress that costs more than most people spend on a week of groceries, and it's the most ridiculous waste I've encountered this month. Tessa stared at him. Carson's yes, that, she said carefully, is either the most perceptive thing anyone has said to me in a very long time, or an extraordinarily sophisticated manipulation tactic. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, something adjacent to one. Can't it be both? She laughed. She hadn't meant to. It came out startled and genuine, and she covered it quickly with her wine glass, which she suspiciously noticed. The dinner proceeded. Course after course arrived with the quiet ceremony of a kitchen that took itself seriously. And somewhere between the third and fourth course, Tessa Novak realized she had stopped thinking about Kyle Dean entirely. Raphael Caruso was not, she assessed, a comfortable man to be near. He had the particular quality of people who moved through the world as though it owed them space, And the strange thing was that it didn't read as arrogance exactly. It read as simple fact. Men like this existed. The world arranged itself accordingly, and arguing with it was a waste of effort. She'd met men like this in her forensic work occasionally, looking across tables in conference rooms at faces she was auditing. The difference was that this one was looking at her like she was the most interesting thing in the room. She wasn't used to that. "You said this restaurant belongs to you tonight," she said. "For what?" "A kind of meeting involves shutting down a restaurant." He looked at her with the patient expression of someone deciding how much of a particular answer to give. "A private one. That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." She folded her napkin in her lap. She was very good at reading what was left out of financial documents, the blank space where a transaction should have been, the absence of a record that should have existed. She was reasonably good at reading people for the same. And what she read in Raphael Caruso's not answer was not evasion exactly. It was a door, left unlocked, but not open. She decided not to walk through it. "What do you know about a company called Dean Capital?" she said instead. The stillness that settled over him was barely perceptible. Another person might not have seen it. She saw it the way she spotted a misaligned decimal, by not looking for it directly. "Why?" he said. "Kyle Dean is a financial advisor. His firm is called Dean Capital." She set her wine down. "I've been doing independent forensic work on a case involving missing client funds. Nothing confirmed. Early stages. But 3 weeks ago I pulled some transaction records through a DA referral and found a pattern I didn't love." She paused. "I probably shouldn't be saying this out loud." "Probably not," Raphael said. "But you already knew the name." He met her eyes. "Yes." Tessa felt the room recalibrate around her, the way it does when the numbers finally start to make a different sense, not a comfortable sense. The other kind. "He didn't stand me up because of traffic," she said. "No," Raphael said, and his voice had changed in a way she couldn't precisely define. Flatter, quieter, more careful. "He didn't. He knew who I was. He found out. Yes, recently." Raphael looked at her with the grey November eyes and said, "He thought you were getting close." He panicked. "It's why my associates have been watching his movements for the past 72 hours. Tessa sat very still. She had a sudden, very clear awareness of the men at the door, of the cleared tables, of the piano that wasn't playing anymore. "This meeting tonight," she said slowly, "is it about Kyle Dean?" "It's about several people," Raphael said. "Dean is a small part of a larger arrangement I've been working to conclude. And what does that arrangement look like exactly?" "Like justice," he said, "of a particular variety." She should have been frightened. She assessed herself for fear and found something more complicated. A high-resolution alertness. The same hum she got at 2 in the morning, when an audit finally started to tell its real story. She was very good at following money. She was very good at finding what shouldn't have been hidden. And the man across from her, she understood now, moved through a world where those skills were worth something specific and considerable. "Are you going to tell me to leave?" she asked. "I was going to ask you to stay. I'm a forensic accountant who works with the DA's office. I know that's a strange person to invite to a private meeting. Perhaps," his gaze didn't waver, "or perhaps the meeting would benefit from someone who can identify exactly it and where it has gone, in a language that holds up in court." Tessa looked at him for a long moment. "You've been sitting across from me for an hour and 40 minutes, she said. "And you didn't know I was coming tonight?" "No." "So this isn't calculated, no. You're improvising." Something moved across his face that might, in a different man, have been called startled. "I don't improvise," he said. "You just did," she said. The almost smile came back. This time it made it slightly further than before. 40 minutes later, 3 men arrived at Marchetti's in expensive coats and were shown to the back room that had been cleared for the purpose. Tessa sat at a table in the corner of the main dining room, with a legal pad she'd borrowed from the host's stand, a glass of water, and the focused attention of a woman who had spent a decade learning to make invisible things visible. She didn't need full sentences. She didn't need full sentences. She wrote down numbers, names, dates. She had the particular gift of the forensic mind, the ability to assemble a coherent ledger from fragments, to hear the shape of a transaction in the space between words. When the men from the back room left 2 hours later, Raphael came and sat back down across from her. "Well," he said. She turned the legal pad toward him. On it, she had mapped 4 shell companies, 2 sets of overlapping transaction dates, a wire routing pattern through 3 separate banks, and a name at the center of it that was not Kyle Dean's. "How?" he said. "The account numbers they mentioned." She tapped the pad. "Third-generation subsidiaries, but the generation's subsidiaries. Someone wasn't careful enough." She consistent. Someone wasn't careful enough. She paused. Also, Dean was funneling client funds to an overseas account that routes back through a holding company registered in Delaware under a name that appears in a federal audit I worked on 18 months ago. I recognized the structure. Raphael looked up from the pad. "You recognized it." "I never forget a shell company," she said. "It's a gift." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, very quietly, "Tessa, yes? I need you to understand something. All right, the information on this pad, the routing structure, the names, this would be genuinely useful to certain people I know. Useful to the DA's office," she said. "Yes, I'm aware, and to others." She held his gaze steadily. "I understand what you do, Mr. Caruso. Raphael. I understand what you do, Raphael." She folded the legal pad closed. "And I understand the difference between what I can put in an official report and what I've just done here tonight. I'm a careful woman. I've been a careful woman my whole adult life." She looked at him. "Kyle Dean spent 6 weeks building trust with me specifically to find out how close I was to something. He wasted my time. He wasted a good dress. He caused me to eat nothing but bread and sparkling water until 10:30 at night, which is its own category of offense." She pulled the legal pad back toward herself and opened it. "I'm not asking you to explain your methods. I'm asking you to let me finish this." He was quiet for a moment. "Finish it," he said. She finished it. By midnight, she had produced 2 documents. One clean, court-admissible summary of the transaction pattern, formatted for the DA's office, and a second document that mapped the fuller picture, the architecture of the arrangement as she understood it, that she passed across the table to Raffaele without explanation. He read it in silence. The restaurant around them had emptied except for 2 of his men near the door and the waiter, who had long since stopped, pretending to have anything else to do, and was sitting at the bar with an espresso. "This will be actionable," Raphael said, touching the first document. "By Monday," she said, "I'll take it in myself. And this one." He held up the second document. "That one is yours," she said. "I trust you'll know what to do with it." He looked at her with the grey eyes and the almost smile that had been getting gradually more substantial throughout the evening. "He thought you were a loose thread," he said. "He was right," she said. "He just pulled it in the wrong direction." Raphael Caruso set the document down. He looked at Tessa Novak, at the dress that had deserved better company, at the legal pad covered in her precise, careful handwriting, at the woman who had walked into the worst evening of her recent life and turned it into something else entirely without asking permission. "I need someone," he said, "who can do what you just did. On a regular basis, officially retained, properly compensated, through a firm that exists on paper and can receive payments without attracting attention." "You're offering me a job," she said. "I'm offering you a significant problem to solve on a regular basis, with appropriate resources and no office politics." He paused. "The compensation would be considerable." I already have a job. You have a job where you get sent on dates by men who want to know how close you are to dismantling their fraud. He looked at her. That seems like a limitation. Tessa was quiet for a moment. She looked at the door of Marchetti's, at the street beyond it, at the ordinary Friday night that had nothing to do with any of this. She thought about Kyle Dean's text, running a little behind, traffic's awful, don't worry. She thought about 6 weeks of small jokes and the accumulation of possibility that she had allowed herself, carefully, to build. She thought about the particular humiliation of 2 hours and 6 minutes at a table by the window in her good Spanx. She thought about the second document and the way Raphael had said this will be actionable with the absolute certainty of a man who intended to act. Send me the details, she said. Properly, through the right channels. I'll have my attorney look at the terms. Of course, and Mr. Caruso, Raphael. She picked up her coat, finally, and stood. He stood when she did, immediately, without ceremony, as though this was simply the correct thing to do, in the presence of someone worth the gesture. Kyle Dean had 3 offshore accounts and a very messy paper trail. By Monday, he won't have any of those things. Raphael Caruso looked at her, and this time the smile, small, precise, unmistakable, completed itself. I'll have someone walk you out, he said. I know the way, she said. She did. She walked out of Marchetti's at 12:18 on a Friday night, in her good Spanx, with the cold Chicago air hitting her face like a verdict, and she had the distinct, clear, slightly uncomfortable certainty that the evening was not over, not in the way that mattered. Not in any way that counted. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. A text from Kyle Dean, 17 minutes ago. Hey, so sorry about tonight. Something came up. Can we reschedule? Tessa read it once. Then she put the phone back in her pocket and kept walking. She had work to do.